The sound of police sirens slicing through the silence of the woods was the last thing I expected after finally fixing the roof of my old cabin. I had just stood back to admire my work, hammer still in hand, when 3 cruisers rolled up the gravel path. The officers jumped out like I was a fugitive on the run. "Sir, step away from the property," Juan barked, hand on his holster. I froze. My cabin, my land, my hammer. And then I saw Herkran, the HOA president, standing smugly behind them, phone in hand, waving dramatically as if she had just single-handedly saved the neighborhood. Little did she know, not only was this cabin mine, but so was the HOA office she was standing in every day like it was her kingdom. The cabin wasn't just a random project of mine, it was my late father's retreat. Built with his own 2 hands in the 70s, over the years storms had battered the roof, the porch had sagged and the paint peeled until it looked abandoned. Life kept me busy, college, career, and eventually starting my own business. But I had always promised myself I'd bring it back to life. Finally, one summer, I took a leave from my company and drove up to the lakefront property, ready to restore. What my dad had built, the property wasn't part of an HOA when he bought it. But years later, a developer built a cluster of houses nearby and formed an HOA that tried to rope in everything around the lake. My father had always refused, and I had inherited his stubbornness. Or maybe more than stubbornness, because unbeknownst to the HOA board, I had inherited something else. Ownership of the building they used as their HOA office. My dad had bought it years earlier when the land company went bankrupt. He thought it would make a good investment. And now, that little detail was about to turn the tables in ways Karen could never have imagined. The first time Karen came snooping, I was ripping up old shingles. She strutted down the gravel driveway, like she owned the place, clipboard in hand. Sunglasses perched on her nose. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. "You can't be doing construction here without HOA approval." I leaned on my hammer, sweat dripping down my forehead. "This is my cabin, my land. No HOA approval needed." She narrowed her eyes. "Every improvement, every repair, every exterior change in this community has to go through the board. Rules are rules." I couldn't help but laugh. "Lady, this isn't your community. This property was never part of your HOA. Check your paperwork before you come barking up the wrong tree." Her nostrils flared. She scribbled something furiously on her clipboard and snapped, "We'll see about that." For the next week, Karen became my shadow. Every day, she'd show up, sometimes with another board member in tow, snapping photos, muttering about code violations, and demanding paperwork that didn't exist. She hated the fact that my cabin sat right on the lakefront, arguably the best spot in the area. HOA houses were cramped on tiny parcels, but my property stretched across several acres with private shoreline access. One afternoon, she even blocked my driveway with her SUV, arms crossed, demanding I submit renovation plans before I could continue. I called the sheriff that time and she was forced to move. She left steaming, vowing this isn't over. And it wasn't. The day I finally finished patching the roof, I heard tires crunching on gravel again. Karen arrived, phone already in her hand. She stood there glaring at me, muttering something to dispatch. Not 5 minutes later, the sirens wailed. 3 cruisers, lights flashing, tore up my peaceful lakeside path. The officers jumped out, shouting like they were busting a drug den. Karen pointed at me dramatically. "That man is trespassing. He's destroying property that isn't his. Arrest him." The officer looked between her and me. "Sir, can you provide proof you own this cabin?" I wiped my hands on my jeans, pulled out the folder I had ready for exactly this nonsense, and handed over the deed. My father's name was still on it, with mine listed as heir. Everything legal, everything ironclad. Karen's jaw dropped. The officer raised an eyebrow at her. "Ma'am, this man owns the property. You filed a false report." But Karen wasn't finished. She crossed her arms and huffed. "Even if he owns it, all properties here fall under HOA jurisdiction. He still has to follow our rules." The officer sighed. "That's a civil matter, not a criminal one." Stop abusing 911 for your HOA disputes, she sputtered, red in the face, as the cruiser slowly backed out of my driveway. But I wasn't done with her yet. The next HOA meeting was a week later. Out of pure spite, I decided to attend. The office was in a modest 2-story brick building in town, with Lakeview HOA stenciled on the glass door. I walked in during the middle of their meeting. Karen sat at the head of the table, barking orders like a queen on her throne. Well, she sneered when she saw me. If it isn't the trespasser, I smiled, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Actually, Karen, I'm the landlord, she blinked. What are you talking about? I pulled out the property deed, the one for the office building. My father bought this property decades ago. When your little HOA started using it, nobody ever transferred ownership. You've been paying rent to a shell company that I happen to own, which means every time you set foot in this office, you're on my property. The room went silent. Board members glanced at each other, stunned. Karen's face went pale, then red, then pale again. You're lying, am I? I pulled out the rent checks they'd been sending signed by her, deposited into my company's account. Looks like you've been paying me for years without realizing it. The board erupted into whispers. One man even chuckled under his breath. Karen slammed her fists on the table. This changes nothing. You still have to follow HOA rules. I leaned in, lowering my voice so everyone leaned closer. No, Karen, this changes everything. Because from now on, if you step onto my cabin property again, I'll consider it trespassing. And if you want to keep using this office, you'll follow my rules. The board turned on Karen almost instantly. She had led them into this embarrassing mess. And now she was the one costing them credibility. Within weeks, they held a vote. Karen was removed as president. The new leadership took a very different approach, cordial, cooperative, and respectful. They even invited me to advise them on property management, since I had far more experience running businesses than any of them. Karen, meanwhile, tried to cling to power. She showed up at the office one day, demanding to be reinstated, only for me to personally escort her out. Step one foot in here again, without permission, I warned, and I'll have you charged with trespassing on my property. Funny how the tables turn, huh? Her face twisted in rage, but she didn't come back. With Karen gone, peace returned to the lake. My cabin restoration went smoothly after that new roof. Fresh paint, a sturdy porch, and windows that opened to the glittering water. I spent evenings on the deck, beer in hand, listening to loons call across the lake just like my dad used to. For the first time in years, the place felt alive again. Neighbors, freed from Karen's tyranny, even started coming by to compliment the work. One older couple admitted they had always admired my dad and were glad the cabin was staying in the family. Sometimes, life has a way of coming full circle. Karen thought she could bully me off my own property, using rules and false reports to make my life miserable. But she had no idea the very ground she stood on, her precious HOA office, was mine all along. The look on her face when she realized she'd been paying me rent for years was worth every nail. Every bead of sweat, every confrontation. The cabin wasn't just restored. Justice was restored too. And as for Karen, let's just say the neighborhood is a whole lot quieter without her voice echoing through it. For more interesting and heart-touching stories, hit the subscribe button now.